Hello everyone, this is Chase Pounds. In today's video, I am going to be discussing, and as part of the 111th 11th centennial of the Titanic disaster, I'm going to be discussing about the third class passengers on board the Titanic, whether or not whether they were prevented or were lost their way trying to find a way up on deck during the night of the disaster. Now, what brought me to this subject is again because it's around the 100th centennial of the Titanic disaster, but this is something I had known, always wondered since I was in middle school, going back to the 100th anniversary in 2012 of the Titanic disaster. And I was particularly fascinated in my interest in the Titanic peaked. I think it peaked really when I was in middle school, and particularly around the 100 centennial of the disaster. I was particularly curious after watching several documentaries, and I hadn't known this before, but I really was particularly wanted to know, was interested in learning about what happened to the third class passenger and whether or not they were prevented from getting up on deck by the crew members. Now, this is something that's always been depicted actually, this interest in what happened to the third class passengers on the Titanic was kind of precursor of me learning about learning about class status, social status, and prejudice among ethnic groups. To learn about ethnic groups and studying race and racism, I think that was a precursor there about the Titanic and the treatment of the third class passengers and what happened to them. Now, and there's been several films made about the Titanic, and pretty much traditionally in almost every film, traditionally kind of standard tradition in almost every Titanic film that's been made is always most movies I've seen have depicted the third class passengers have always depicted this from both the made for TV and the actual version of A Night to Remember to the recent 1997 James Cameron Titanic with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet have always depicted the third class passengers either being prevented by the stewards by prejudiced stewards for getting up on deck, sometimes armed, as well as prevented either by locked gates or barriers. They were just left locked where they weren't able to get through to upper decks. And most films have, again, these movies have always portrayed this, but many of the information I read online, and most of these information I read online, as well as recent videos on YouTube or documentaries, have always suggested that third class passengers had lost their way getting up on deck, as well as some of the many of the passengers did not speak proper English, which also contribute to them not understanding the orders of them being told to get on deck. Though that was mainly the main obstacles that kept the third class passengers reaching the boat decks. to lifeboats and safety. At the same time, passenger crew members neglected the safety of the third-class passengers as well. Though this has always been many of the speculations to whether the to the fate of the third class passengers who didn't on the night of the Titanic disaster. But yet there's still stuff it was conflicting information I heard about third class passengers, whether they were prevented or whether they were just lost. Though yet documentary, though despite these not only in film but mostly dated documentaries going back to the 90s, always mention how the third class passengers were prevented by stewards, and some of them even reenacted the accounts. And this is particularly in the A&E, the great A&E Titanic documentary, Titanic Death of a Dream. It was one of the experts that mentions makes a reference by saying, this is why I call the little Hitler syndrome. And the third class, the stewards on Titanic, so it's their job to keep the third class passengers from getting up on deck. They simply kept them back from the higher classes, as they were. That's how he put it. And that particularly stood out. That documentary stood out about the Hitler syndrome. But this hasn't really been substantiated whether the third class passengers were prevented. And there's also, though there weren't many accounts of third class passengers being prevented, other than the only supporting evidence was Daniel was a surviving third class passenger by the name of Daniel Buckley, who claimed that when they were getting ready, when they were organized the passengers on deck, that two sailors came along, and he said he gave first one account that two sailors came along, telling everybody to get up on deck unless you want to get drowned. He also claimed the water, just as they were saying that, he was going back to get his life jacket, the water started coming up the deck, the stairs actually. He mentioned that. But then he also gave testimonies that there was that they tried to keep us down there, and that he mentioned how the fellow was trying to make his way up on deck, and the sailors shoved him back down there, suggesting that they were trying to keep the third class passengers from getting up on deck. And he even said, if I could get my hands on the sailor, I would have threw him overboard or something. And there's something I read in one of the books I own about that. But that was one of the only few accounts, given some accounts from the surviving third class passengers, given the fact that many of the third class passengers really didn't survive, so there wasn't much to really support the fact that there was the third class fact that if they were really prevented or not. But most of those who survived said they weren't prevented, either lost their way on deck or could not understand English. There was one account of a third class passenger who was actually helped by one of the seamen on deck, and he showed her to her light, or to her, I think her name was Minnie Coward. She was shown to her cabin to get a life jacket, to get shown to her cabin for a life jacket by one of the jackets, but she either didn't have one, and the sailor actually gave up his life jacket. He gave it to her, and he said, if you survive or something like the way it goes, pray for me. And that's one of the heroic stories of some of the third class passengers being helped by one of the crew members. You also had a steward by the name of Stuart Hart who led two groups of third class passengers up on deck as well. And those are some of the accounts by some of the third class passengers, but many don't mention anything about third class passengers really being prevented aggressively anyway. And and people also say that the barriers that were depicted in the movies that show these gates, high gates, that was also falsely portrayed. Though I think it gets mixed up, is exaggerated. Now exaggerate, I think. Though there were some gates, but they weren't high. They were just like waist high, like little doors. And this was in the outside the promenade deck that kept them from I think the bow, the forward well deck, that that's where this gate was. It wasn't inside the ship, and they weren't essentially all over the ship as depicted in the films. But that is often I guess that's what's is often I guess exaggerated, wrongly depicted in the films is the gates. And though in one of the documentaries, again there's a dated one, it's called Titanic Secret Revealed, they did show when they were exploring the wreck, they did show like a gate, the high gate, just like was depicted in the movie, one of those barrier gates. Though people say this still, there was even a person on one of the forums on the Titanic discussion board who referenced this, and people did not understand what he was talking about. But yet there are some, they do. I'm not sure that was, and I forget. Well, actually, but that's the confusing thing is they say there's no gates, but they show the gates in the documentary. These barrier gates in the wreck, and I think it's located near like the storage area where they kept the food, the vegetable prep area. There was a barrier gate. And they come out with, and they do say that a lot of them were prevented, but yet still it's conflicting stories. I hear that they weren't prevented and they just lost their way on deck in the confusion of the night. And not only that, at the disaster, the White Star Line apologized for the third class passengers, for the deaths of the third class passengers, were the majority of the victims of the Titanic, but yet they denied any form of discrimination. Even though they denied it, not to say they probably did do it in real life, but just covering it up. But there's still no proof that it actually happened. And as I said, this has always again piqued my interest, particularly in learning about the struggle of the third class treatment of third class passengers, and would become an interest that I think made me interested in learning, studying class, race, ethnicity, and social status after researching this. And not only the class status, not only that, there's another example of social status with the Titanic was its victims, how they were treated as well. Many of the first and second class passengers were embalmed and were to be in the bodies that were recovered were to be put in a coffin. I think a casket or coffin. I think the second class were in bags of ice. Wrapped in, I think the first and second, I think they were either wrapped in bags. The first and second were even wrapped up in bags. First and second were in caskets and coffins. Well, the third class were put in canvas bags and preserved with ice. And then the identifiable bodies, which made up most of the Titanic's third class passengers and crew, were to be buried at sea if they were badly decomposed or badly damaged. And at one point, they had to bury most of the bodies at sea altogether because they ran out of embalming fluid at one point. It counts for a lot of victims being unidentified or unrecovered. And that particularly interests me as well about the treatment of the victims based on class status. And though, as they said, the wide storyline wasn't trying to discriminate against the third class passengers. It existed, given the fact that there was many different ethnic groups of third class passengers from Eastern Europe. Mostly you had a lot of Italians, Jewish, probably Polish, Middle Eastern, Southern Europe, and you had a lot of Irish as well. And many of these ethnic groups weren't really thought of as, to my knowledge, weren't really considered the pure white race as of today, but they were thought as in a way they were kind of thought as inferior. As many immigrants, that was the attitude to many immigrants that came during the turn of the century. And as I said, there was a lot of Irish on the type. There may have been a lot of Irish as well, because a lot of the third class passengers were from Queenstown, Ireland. And actually, by the way, Queenstown, Ireland is also where the wreck of the Lusitania is, off the coast of Queenstown, Ireland. But anyway, then a lot of then the Titanic was also built in Belfast, Ireland, so that's that Irish connection as well. You had a couple of workers who were known as the Guarantee Group, who actually had the privilege of going on board the Titanic for a first maiden voyage. I think all of them didn't survive, unfortunately. And at that time, Irish as well were at one point in time hated between the mid 19th century to the I guess turn to the early 20th century. Around this time period, you had a lot of Irish that migrated, mainly due to the potato famine, which is somewhat of a myth, but yet it was also because of political issues over in Ireland as well. And when a lot of the Irish came to America, a lot of them were discriminated and were looked down on. They weren't looked on as the pure white race, as they were later become accepted, but they were kind of as inferior. In some cases, they were discriminated and stereotyped just in a way as blacks and other non-white races were discriminated against, and they were thought as inferior as the black and non-white race, just like blacks or the Asians or Mexicans, Latino. And you had stereotypes such as tropes, just like black African, just like with the blacks, just like with Black American stereotypes like coon or Sambo. their stereotypes for Irish were patty, and a lot of times they were depicted just like blacks as being grotesque, animal-like, beastly in a lot of the cartoon depictions. They again in hated by the mainstream Anglo-Saxon Americans, white Americans at the time, and a lot of a lot of the other Irish ethnic groups, the Irish that came before these new wave of Irish people came in the 1840s, they would look down and they distinguished themselves as Scots Irish. They kind of I'm trying to get my words out. To try to distinguish themselves separate themselves from the new poor Irish immigrants and I guess the already I think they were called I forget what the name was. It was in the documentary I was watching. I was just watching it over again. I watched this last year, and this year I watched the same documentary, Irish in America, to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, which was a documentary I used to watch when I was in 7th grade. That used to come on the History Channel every St. Patrick's Day, and again it talks about the Irish history of Irish American experience. But they were often again Irish were looked down by many Anglo-Saxon white Americans, including especially the British. There was a a, a intolerance of Irish, especially among the British, and they also again affect the political issues overseas in Ireland because most of the island was controlled by the British, and but over time, however, the Irish would gain acceptance in America in the years following the Civil War, and by the turn of the 20th century, were part of the American fabric. I guess the culture, the fabric of America, as they took on the roles, as they became accepted American citizens, they would help. I guess they would be the model, be the first model immigrants for the next immigrants to come, which would be the Jews, the Italians, the Polish of the be the model. I guess trying to find the words to say it. I guess the become the model immigrants of. I guess they would become the model. They would set example for the next immigrants of immigrants that were newly arriving to America. A lot of times, a lot of the Irish who deport a lot of the immigrants who documented a lot of the immigrants that came in were Irish themselves in Ellis Island, and that's and that was the Irish experience. And yet the interesting thing is that a lot of the Irish, yet even though they face discrimination and prejudice, yet they would adopted some of the same American prejudice of prejudice and racism towards black Americans, as a lot of them who it's been said that they were enslaved, but in the documentary it doesn't mention that. In most this information on the internet about it, and YouTube videos about it, but it's not very much known that Irish were also enslaved as well. But yet, when they came to America, some of them settled down south and became plantation owners themselves and owned slaves, and adopted some of the prejudice. And a lot of them were some Irish were part of the Confederacy. And I mentioned this in my video from last year about the from last year on Irish Americans. They some of the Irish took part in the race riot in the Civil War in 1863 Civil War draft riots in New York City, and they burned down, killed a lot of the free black Americans, and burned down many of the homes, schools, orphanages, and churches, set ablaze. And that's, yes, to a extent, is not very known of. And yes, and it's probably getting dark in here, but that was the what I had to say about the Irish. And again, going back to the Titanic, it's still kind of conflicting in whether the third class passengers were prevented or not, or did they just lose their way. Most of the information I recently looked up suggests that they were lost their way and just couldn't understand English, and that could contribute to the reason why many third class passengers did not make it to the boats and lost their lives in 1912. And and by the way, it's the 75th anniversary of the James Cameron film. I forgot to mention that. That's all I have to say. This is another video by Chase Pounds. Stay tuned for my next video.